So you've all probably heard the news by now or seen someone talk about it at some point. I'm talking about the crafter. This block may seem completely useless to the average player, but to the Redstone community, this thing is an absolute game changer. Previously, we were limited to just mass farming raw materials. Now that we can actually process them, we're literally entering the Industrial Revolution in Minecraft. Except of course without child labor, air pollution, and modern OSHA violations. Now I've seen a few videos experimenting on something called a universal crafter, but I decided to narrow down my focus to just pistons. So, let's get into it. Alright, so after about 5 hours of testing, I managed to create a working prototype. As you can see, when I hit the button, the items load into the crafter, and it spits out a piston when it's done. I'd say it does so at a pretty brief pace, relatively slowly if you're trying to mass produce this though. So, now that I've nailed the concept, I try to work on more efficient versions. Before we get into how the factory works, I should probably teach you all how the basics of Redstone work, right? If you have an understanding of Redstone, feel free to skip to the next portion. But if you don't, then I highly encourage that you take a look at this, because it may help you understand how some of the system works, and maybe help you debug it if you mess up somehow. Anyways, first off, we have an observer, right? An observer will detect most changes, most block changes, right? Essentially, this face will examine the block in front of it. If it detects a change, then it'll fire once. Now, if we go down here, we also use this mechanic in our system. Essentially, we chain observers with blocks with multiple states, and every time there's an increase, every time there's a new link in the chain, it'll fire one additional time. So, for example, this will fire once, twice, 3 times, and 4 times. And allow me to demonstrate here. As you can see, it does exactly that. And pairing up with the knowledge we have before, it detects a block state change. This lever is changing states from power to unpowered, and it's detecting that. Moving on to the basics of redstone interaction, when we hit this lever, this dust is powered into this block, and it can power adjacent blocks. This is not limited to lamps. This can be pistons, doors, trap doors, fence gates, anything that can take a redstone signal, except of course dust. This signal cannot travel through the block and into adjacent dust. However, this does not apply when you have a repeater, as the repeater can push a signal through and into the adjacent blocks. We look at the third example, much like the first. The redstone signal is being pushed into the block. It's powering adjacent lamps, not powering adjacent dust, but the redstone repeater can pull the signal through the block behind it, powering this lamp back here. That covers the essential basics of how redstone works within the system. After a couple of hours, I came up with this. It may look complex, but don't feel overwhelmed. If you're a non-redstone person, then it's okay. It's essentially this 2-block tile repeated over and over again, and these things do not interfere with each other. So we would describe this with the term tileable. This version is incredibly quick, and in this hopper clock, there's an absolute minimum requirement of 5 blocks in it. Now, if you don't know what a hopper clock that is, that's okay. For your non-redstone people, a hopper clock is just a very controllable clock that sends a signal after a set delay. Essentially, after these 5 blocks funnel into this hopper, it'll power this redstone block will switch sides, power the whole system. Once these 5 blocks switch back into this hopper, it'll do the reverse and depower everything. So, allow me to demonstrate how quick this system is. Very quick. We just power it off. And let me collect everything here. As you can see, 42 pistons in a relatively fast time. That's lightning fast in my book. But there are a couple of drawbacks as to why I do not use this system and why I cannot recommend this to be used. First one is that there's no proper item storage system. As you can see, all of the items were dropping on the floor and they can very easily get stuck. And that's the second problem. Items get super easily stuck. Like on this corner, there's a very high possibility that the item can get dispensed from this crafter. Get pushed all the way up until this corner, and then I can do nothing to get it back down. This system is both vulnerable and creates server lag, which is not good. If you look at the amount of pistons firing at a time, if you're to tile this even more, which is adding more and more of these units, it would eventually cause a lot of server lag, and that's never good for Redstone, and especially in this case because the timings for these items to go into the crafter are very sensitive, and that's why I can't recommend this system. What does work, however, is this factory system. Unlike the prototype, it solves all the previous problems we have. There's an item collection system. Items are not gonna get stuck in here if you build it right, of course. And it's much more lag friendly, seeing as instead of working with pistons to update everything, you are working with lamps this time. So while it does fix all the problems, it does come at a very slight speed setback. There's an absolute minimum of 6 items required in this hopper clock, which may not seem like much of a difference here, and it really isn't, but for safety measures, I would always put 7 items in the hopper clock. So how does the system work? Essentially, we use this observer chain concept to fire this dropper with planks in it 3 times. That lines up the first 3. After a short amount of delay, the cobblestone is then dispensed into the system. 4 cobblestone is in here. However, cobblestone, without anything else, it would have been dispensed in this order. So you're probably wondering, how did it get into this order then? Well, while the cobblestone is dispensing, this lower system right here is on a very slight delay to place a piece of iron into the slot right here before the second piece of cobblestone can enter. It waits for the third piece of cobble to enter, and then there's just enough delay for this piece of redstone to slide into this slot before the final piece of cobble is dispensed. After all that happens, this is powered, and the signal travels through the dropper and into the crafter, as this concept is outlined around, I believe, this one right here, as this block would also be powered. So yeah, that's essentially the basics of this system. Allow me to show you it in work. As you can see, items are initially fired and dropped open. It works slightly slower, but it works pretty much the same. Does not encounter the same issues as the previous system, and it feels very reliable. I'll turn it off now. There may be some pistons from a previous fire here, but as you can see, they rack up at a pretty nice pace. And this one should be very tileable as well. So let's start off from the fence gates. We want to have a fence gate here, and we want 2 observers, 1 up top and 1 on side, and 1 observer down. So this is essentially what will detect the signal and disperse it. And then we want to chain our observers and lamps just a few times, and that'll go into a block. I won't be using the color-coded blocks just for the sake of building this easier. This block then has a dropper attached to it. These signs are unnecessary, they're just here to show you what goes where. Then you're just going to need a crafter on down orientation, so make sure the output is facing downwards. The next thing you're going to want 3 blocks here and 3 repeaters. Set this repeater to full delay and leave these 2 repeaters the same. It is very important that you have the repeaters on the exact timings I show you, as the repeater timings are crucial for the items to get into the correct slot. Even a small adjustment may mess up the whole system. Place a block right here so this observer can push power into the repeaters. Once again, we're going to use the little chain mechanic. Grab our redstone lamp. 1 lamp here, 1 observer here, 1 lamp here, 1 observer here. This block should be empty eventually, so we can just put a temporary block to put a downward facing dropper into the system. This is the plank dispenser and the cobblestone dispenser. What you need to do next is work on the iron and redstone dispensing. What you're going to do, place a block here. We're going to pull the signal from the block with this repeater, add 1 more tick to it. Then we just put this piece here. We're carrying the signal down here into this observer with a sticky piston attached to it and a block. Place 1 temporary block here and then an observer. Break the temporary block and then place a dropper on top of the observer. What you want to do next is put a hopper facing into the crafter, and that should also lie on top of the dropper. Make sure that this little notch piece is facing into the crafter, as that orients what direction the items are going into. what you want to do next, you take an observer, you pull it off of the side of the previously placed dropper. You place 3 blocks here, you put 1 down, you break this block, you put a repeater here, full delay, place 2 blocks up top, and then place a dropper here. What you want to do, take 3 redstone dust, just line it up top of this little piece you built here, and place 2 repeaters. Put this one on full delay, and then add 1 more notch to this. And this is essentially the system. All you need to do is add the hopper inputs into the back, which will go here, 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 here. It will line up with the droppers here. These should be the only droppers in the system. I think I took them out of the previous design. You should just line up to the top. And if you just want to run a minecart system like this over top of it so that items can enter the system and restock, then it should work. Alright, what we want to do next is establish the blueprint. Essentially what this does is it safeguards the item input system and prevents it from getting all scrambled. We just want to get some planks, stone, iron ingot, and redstone dust. What you want to do, put 2 planks on the far top left corner, and then just place 1 plank on the rest of the top side. You want 1 ingredient for the rest of the crafting table. You just craft the classic piston recipe. This should be what you see. Make sure all of your droppers are fueled with resources. So planks go in here, cobble goes in here, iron ingots go in here, and then redstone goes in here. Make sure you remember that. And if you need a reference, then just take a screenshot of this. Now, when we fire this, or rather, when we change this by opening or closing the fence gate, then this should successfully create a piston. And there we go. There's a piston. As you can see, it worked the second time. And if the crafting blueprint gets disrupted, as long as it doesn't change when you keep firing it, it should be completely fine. As you can see, we got 4 pistons out of it. This works completely fine. Now there's a couple of things you need to make sure of when you construct this. Make sure you check these, otherwise your factory may break or result in inefficiencies. So the first thing you need to do is to check the items in the crafter. They should look something like this or something like this. It doesn't really matter as long as there is a very obvious template of the piston. When you use this, it should be fine. The second thing that you want to do is to make sure that the water stream is placed correctly. If I go into spectator mode, you'll see that this water stream actually has a length of 7 instead of 8. You might be wondering why that is, but essentially these little output portions need to be lined up with a water stream. You cannot have them lined up with this little empty space right here, as they will get stuck there and there will be no way to move it automatically. You'll have to go in and grab it manually. And this is an automatic farm. The last thing you want to be doing is manual labor. Finally, you want to make sure that when your system is depowered, these pistons have their blocks spat out. You do not want this piston to be blocking the waterway funnel, because if your final pulse has an item dropping and your piston is locked, then that last item will despawn unless you manually pick it up. And once again, we do not want to do manual labor in an automatic farm. So these are the things you need to make sure of whenever you build this farm. Alright, thanks for watching. If you like it, then check out some of my other content, like my skits and SMP vids. I might upload more redstone content like a repeater farm if this gains any form of traction. Anyways, later.